Hi, this is Nancy with On Point TV. We have finished our Lone Star top. We've taken all the time we possibly can to make the very best Lone Star top that we can, and now it's time to quilt it. I know that many of you are going to get your Lone Stars done and you're going to send it to the long arm quilter that you know and trust, and that's fine. I got no problem with that. But I want you to know that you can do this yourself. Maybe not a king size, but you definitely can be doing your own wall quilts, maybe even lap quilt size. I want to show you with free motion quilting. I want you to also know that it can't all be done with straight line. You can use your walking foot. With just your walking foot, you can quilt your entire Lone Star quilt. I'll tell you, with the diamond section, you literally just go right down the diamonds. I would prefer that instead, and I think it's more secure for your quilt, instead of you going right down the seam of it, that you actually go on both sides of that seam. Yeah, it's going to take you twice as long, but that is going to make your Lone Star quilt actually last longer. There's a quilt I'm going to show you later where even the setting squares and triangles I did with just straight lines. So you can do that. What I want to show you today is at least 3 or 4 of my favorite free motion Lone Star quilting designs. And I'm going to try and do it all so you'll really get a feel for how the whole thing flows, all right? So I'm here in my studio. Welcome to my studio. I spent a lot of time cleaning it, so don't drop by unexpectedly and expect it to look like this, okay? So here we are in my studio, and this is my quilting table. This is it's a Hobby 1200. It has a FAF name on it. It's really a very industrial quilting machine. Doesn't have any zigzag, doesn't even have where I can drop my feed dogs. I set my feed dogs to 0 to do free motion quilting. I've got my Lickity Grip. My Lickity Grip is what I put on my hands. Kind of makes my hands feel a little bit like a Post-it note so that I can hold on to my quilt. If I am doing a larger quilt, I get, you know, yeah, I got to quilt that king size quilt. I am going to use the gloves. It's going to make it easier. But for the most part, the Lickity Grip is going to work great. I set it right here in my little toolbox. I've got a little glass of water over here, and it's only water in that glass in case you're wondering. I also have my all-purpose oil, so I'm going to oil my machine pretty regularly. This is my walking foot, so before I do any free motion quilting, normally I'm going to do quite a bit of straight line quilting first. So on this little sample we're going to work on, I did the straight lines for the borders, so imagine that that's a border. I also did the straight line edge here at the edge of the quilt, and then I did the straight lines around all of the diamonds. All right, then I'm ready to free motion quilt. So I'm going to put my little guys away. Before I free motion quilt, I'm always going to do some sort of a little practice. I am not a practicer, I'm a doer. I'm all about the Nike, just do it. I don't practice free motion quilting. But this is just to make sure that my machine is set up right, I've got a new needle in it, and that my tensions are good. So I did a little bit of work, I looked back, yep, my tensions look good. I'm ready to quilt. So I'm going to start with my favorite Lone Star quilting design. Now I saw this on a quilt one day at a quilt show and drew it because back then you didn't have phones that you could take a picture of anything lickety split. I took my pencil, pad and paper, and I drew this quilting design because I just thought it was so cool and it's so easy. This design can be done with your walking foot because it's just a gentle curve. So I'm going to come into position here and put my needle down. Gonna bring up my bobbin, although it might not because I used my thread cutter. Nope, can't get my bobbin because my bobbin thread is already too short. So I'm ready to start quilting. Gonna start with my needle. There it is, in the down position. I always start with 5 or 6 really, really small stitches, and then I start quilting. So here's my 5 or 6 little small quilter stitches, and then I go. So the idea here is I kind of am making a curve. So this is the seam line. This curve is just going to go around. So this can be done, like I said, with your walking foot. When I get to my intersection, I'm going to cross over and go to the other side. Go right to the middle and then come to this end again. Go right to the top and now work my way backwards with that same idea. So I'm crisscrossing. So every time that intersection is going to be really nice and sharp because I'm crisscrossing. When I get to the center, I'm going to go the other way. Whoops, let me get that thread out of the way. And here we go the other way. When I get right to here, I do want to cut this tail off. I'll lock it up later. If it were a show quilt, I might actually make the thread longer and tuck it inside, but I don't need to do that. And come to the other side. You can see how it makes these kind of football shapes or eye shapes, whatever the case may be. This is a very secure way to quilt this because it's covering all of those intersections, so all of those seams that we pressed open, they're going to be nice and secure. So now I'm going to cut my thread off, and I'm going to jump now and quilt these two. So if I'm doing this design on the entire quilt, I'm going to be able to jump from here to here and then stop, and then I'll do the next set of 3. So I'm going to start right here on this inside, go all the way up. So you can see how this particular design can be done with your walking foot. You would have to turn the quilt around at the intersections, and that's why we love free motion quilting, because you don't have to do that, but it can be done. Done with that one. Now I'm going to come up and do this, just this little twosie guy up here. That's the idea. You can cover the entire quilt with these. And this, I think, is probably the quickest way I know of to actually quilt a Lone Star quilt. The next design I'm going to show you is one of my favorite because it involves going back and forth, and it's really going to fill in all of these gaps. At the end, I'm going to show you a quilt that I did with this particular design that is truly my favorite design of all of these. So I'm going to come to the middle, start just like as if it were the other one, always starting in the middle. I guess you just got to, so I do. Right? So I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to make 5 little leaves, flames, whatever you want to call them. 2. There's 4. Now with this 5th one, I'm going to go up, and then I'm going to go all the way up again to the next diamond. So I'm going to make this continuous with these 5. One thing to consider, what is going to make these little leaves have a little bit of style is when you come up to the point right here, that you give it a little turn. You give it a little, if you just go straight up and down, it'll work. I just don't think it has any personal style to it. I don't know how that sounds, but it's just true. Down, come right back up again. Now to my last one. And this again is not really a hard design. You're just going back and forth, giving it a little personal style at the top of the point. Now I like to go all the way down to the beginning again. And that kind of gives it a little bit of a stem as I'm going back down. And more importantly, it gets me to the other end. So now I can go up and down the other side. and you would see I'd be able to go to the next section. Keep in mind, this is a much more dense design. This is the type of design that you want to do on a wall quilt. Honestly, the idea of it being so dense is also going to make the quilt much tighter and not as soft. I wouldn't do this design on a bed quilt. This design, the one that's more open like this, that's a really good choice for a bed quilt. That's going to give you a nice softness to the quilt, and as you wash it a little bit more, it'll get softer and softer. The next design I want to show you, let me cut that little guy off, is going to be very similar to this design where I just went back and forth and created those leaves, but this time it's going to have a little bit of curl to it. Again, this would be a design that I would do on a wall quilt or a show quilt, something where I wanted more of that dense quilting, not on a bed quilt. All right, so I'm going to start just like I did before, but these leaves are going to be a little bit bigger. Now I could come and just do another, one leaf right there and call that good, and it wouldn't be as dense. But I like to do a little curlicue and then bring it right on up to the next guy. So a little bit of a fatter leaf. And then a little curlicue. There, I like that one better. That one worked better. Now with that design, I'm not going to go back. If I try to go back, I'm going to end up getting too much thread onto my little curlicue design. I don't know, I just think it's kind of pretty. And of course I would go to the other side. The last one is a big feather. And I love this design for a bed quilt. It's going to be nice and soft, especially if you put the wool batting on there. You're going to have enough quilting to hold the quilt together for as long as you need it to, but it's going to be nice and soft. And this is a big open feather. One of my favorite things to quilt is a big open feather. After I learned that I could do an open feather. For a long time I thought every feather had to be very formal and with the stems, and all of the stitching needed to be one right on top of another. When I found the open feather, whole new world, made life so much easier. So this feather is going to come wide on the diamond and then come narrow again at the top. I'm going to start here at the bottom, my tiny stitches, and do my first feather petal. And my open feathers, I come from the outside in. So as I do this next one, notice how I go to the outside of the feather and then come in. And when I'm doing this, and I'll show you on this next one, when I'm coming over here, come and make this curve and kind of come forward and then back again. That's going to give it a little bit of style. It's not just going to look like a thumb. If you give it a little bit of style, that curve, it just looks great instead of just a whole bunch of thumbs going up and down. And as I go, these are going to get bigger and bigger. And I think probably the most difficult part about this is as your feathers get bigger is for you to keep your stitch length consistent. Technically, I don't know what it is, but when you do larger motions, there's a tendency to get your stitch length to be bigger. Keep your stitch length consistent, your hand motion consistent. You're just making a larger curve. Doesn't mean your hands need to be moving faster. Now they're going to get a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to bring this all the way back down, running the spine. Get here to the middle. I'm going to go to this side because that's an empty one. Now I'm going to do my feathers going the other way. I can do this. There you go. I think you get the idea. I want to show you some of the quilts that I've done with some of these designs now. So I talked to you about some of the quilting that we've done on the quilts, and I want to show you a couple of examples of a few of the quilts that I've done, Lone Star quilts. I said at one point that you could do the entire quilt in straight lines. You can. So if you're afraid of your free motion foot, go to your walking foot. You can do this. This corner, the background setting squares and triangles on this quilt are done with straight lines. That can all be done with your walking foot. Keep in mind that wasn't. That was done with my free motion foot, just going back and forth when I come here to the corner, running along the edge and going back again. As you get more comfortable with your free motion quilting, straight lines are something you can do. The next quilt, I'm hoping you can really see the quilting in that. And if you can't see it in the quilting, you should be able to see it in the beads. So this quilt was done with that feather that had the 5 that goes up and down. And then on every other ring, I put down some beads. So these are size 11 seed beads, sewed down, usually 3 beads at a time, going through them. There are, just as a point of order, there are 10,000 beads on this quilt, just because I thought it was pretty and I enjoy putting beads on my quilt. So and this is a wall quilt, so obviously that's a fine idea. So with the beads, I just followed that same design, and it really rolls all the way up into onto the very tips here. The judges loved this quilt. They were a little bedazzled by the beads, and anytime you can get a judge bedazzled by something, you know you're doing okay. This last quilt, I did not quilt. This is a block of the month quilt that is done. It's a Nancy Rink design. I love the name of it. It was called Getting to Know Hugh. And every time I hear that, I want to sing the song Getting to Know You, but we're not going to do that right now. So this quilt I taught as a block of the month. This is on my bed. And to be really super comfortable on my bed, I wanted double wool batting. This quilt is the most comfortable thing I've ever slept under. And so because it was double wool batting, I asked my friend Karen Giles to quilt it, and I told her I didn't want a lot of quilting. I wanted this quilt to have puffs. So here on the pieced blocks, there's not a lot of quilting. There's enough, but with that double wool batting, I've got a lot of fluff. So when it came to the Lone Star portion, she did one of my favorites, the big open feather. So there's a lot of really good puffy places within there. And this is a different type of a Lone Star. This Lone Star is done with just long scrappy strips. Again, Nancy Rink design, Getting to Know Hugh, all of it's there. Really, really fun quilt. So we are done with our Lone Star. We have finished it. We should have a pattern coming out soon. So if you're wanting to have a pattern for the Lone Star, that'll be available. You can purchase it right here on OnPoint-TV. And most importantly, if you have any questions, we're starting a new segment called Ask Nancy. So ask me some questions and I will do my best to get your questions answered on air so that everybody will know what's going on. So that's the end of Lone Star. Happy quilting. I hope you like this video. Please like our videos and subscribe to our channel. If you have any questions, just leave me a comment. I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can.